Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Masson of FD Recruit. Huge welcome to what will hopefully be a very informative, relaxed and enjoyable webinar on the qualities private equity investments require from finance directors and CFOs. And I'd very much like to welcome Roshan Puri, Investment Director at YFM Equity Partners, Jonny Kay, Managing Partner, Queen's Park Equity, and Charlie Pidgeon, Investment Partner, NVM Private Equity, who thankfully are going to do 99% of the talking. So to all those attending, we certainly welcome any questions, and please put these in the chat box. Don't email them, as I believe Zoom tells you to, but put them in the chat box, and towards the end of the webinar, we'll answer as many as we can. Okay, so let's get started. Jonny, if I could just, ask each of you to introduce yourself, but Jonny, would you like to tell us about yourself and what's happening with you at the moment?
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon, all. As Mark says, I'm Jonny Kay, Managing Partner of Queen's Park Equity, or QPE for short. We're a newly established first-time private equity fund, actually raised during the midst of the global pandemic, raising 202 million of total commitments, and as a firm now kind of fully focused on investing behind entrepreneur-led businesses across the education, health and pharma and tech services sectors. We very recently closed our sixth investment, and in 2/3 of all cases actually supported the appointment of a new CFO as part of our investment thesis behind those businesses. So really delighted to be here today, Mark, with you all, and thank you.
Welcome. And Charlie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good afternoon all. So my name's Charlie Pidgeon, Investment Partner at NVM. So we are an SME focused investor. We've got an institutional fund which we invest. So we invest somewhere between sort of 5 and 15 of equity into UK-based SMEs, and we very much have a sort of sector agnostic sort of focus. So look at all sectors across the broad spectrum of the UK. So a lot of the businesses we back are founder-led businesses or entrepreneurial-led businesses that are sort of scaling up, and taking it to the next stage. And we provide capital and also, I guess, the help and guidance to sort of scale those businesses through to hopefully a bigger exit, in the future.
Thanks, Charlie. And Roshan, yourself.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks everyone for having us. So I'm Roshan, an investment director at YFM Equity Partners. We are similar to Queen's Park and NVM, probably somewhere in between them. We're a UK-based private equity investor, backing small and medium-sized businesses on a scale-up journey. We have principally two funds. One is a buyout fund, one is a growth capital fund. So typically backing MBO strategies up to £20 million enterprise value, and growth capital strategies of slightly earlier stage businesses that are looking to scale up. And support that we provide is obviously our time, our resources, our networks, but also people that we can introduce to deals. And we, having a fully functioning and experienced finance professional in the mix is key to it. And so we like to do that early on and ideally pre-deal, and get someone in the mix who can really shape the business with the management team and with us in support. So delighted to be here.
Thank you, and thanks everyone. Thanks, Roshan, for that. And so moving on to the first question, really, that I'll put to and Jonny, if I could put this to you, what do you think are the key roles and responsibilities of a finance director, or CFO joining a PE-backed SME?
Key roles and responsibilities. I think for us, our expectations are very much typically to provide us, the investor, with visibility and certainty over both the financial performance of the business, but I guess also alongside the chief executives of those businesses that we're very much backing. I guess from a CFO's perspective, also providing some of that strategic input on some of the financially related matters that fundamentally impact or underpin the growth plan. I would suggest some of those typical responsibilities might include working alongside us and at QPE, our sort of ambassador network of experienced professionals we have supporting the fund's initiatives to kind of identify the key levers that drive the business. Also creating a framework, perhaps to track and report those key levers, all with the perspective of fundamentally, best maximizing shareholder value over the time frame of our involvement. Other very specific responsibilities, I suppose, just to be complete in my answer, could also include managing any bank debt relationships that, potentially could be introduced as part of kind of a private equity investment behind the company. And obviously a lot of that sits with the CFO, all the way through to kind of covenant reporting or indeed relationship management with those other key stakeholders.
That's great. Thanks, Jonny, for that. And Charlie, and indeed Roshan, do you want to add anything to that on this particular one?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair summary. I think the basics, sort of preparation of timely and accurate numbers. That's a prerequisite that I think everyone sort of looks for. I think one of the things about sort of smaller SME businesses is typically entrepreneurial-led or founder-led businesses. So, that relationship with the MD is pretty fundamental. And that's the softer side of things, I think, as well is as important, as the sort of detail. And I think, it is it's an interesting dynamic because typically these are businesses that are having an FD for the first time. FDs are typically overlooked by entrepreneurs. They're typically the last senior appointment in the door. So being able to sort of, I guess, build that relationship, but also be able to sort of challenge as well, because ultimately it's got to be a role that is both constructive, but also has an ability to sort of challenge things and challenge the status quo, which, is always a difficult sort of tightrope to walk, I would say. But it's something that is pretty important because actually, it's a team, ultimately a senior team, and everyone needs to work together, and have sort of challenge, but also praise at the same time. So I would say it's quite it's an interesting dynamic to sort of walk, but one that can work really well if you get it right.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And just sort of moving on to the next question, and Charlie, if I could put this one to you initially, and Roshan, do add anything as well. What are the key attributes that PE firms look for in an FD CFO joining an owner-managed business, receiving backing for the first time, would you say?
Yeah, no, I think it's I guess probably following on from previously, being the sort of the first sort of professional FD in the business. I think a lot of it comes back to the basics, pulling the numbers together, but also an ability to sort of step back from the detail. Because I think a lot of the time you can get sort of bogged down in the minutiae of building plans, building forecasts, but actually the ability to sort of step back, and take a commercial view, I think is one that is highly valued, certainly by us, in terms of being able to both articulate the growth story, but also being able to sort of challenge it as well. So I think that's probably quite a key piece. So that commerciality, taking a sort of commercial view of things, is as important, I think, as being in the detail. I think also that we try to work on the sort of no surprises and total transparency sort of ethos, which I think again is really important. I think being sprung with a challenge sort of at the board meeting when you turn up isn't really helpful for anyone. I think being able to have a dialogue about issues or challenges and having that open relationship, good and bad, actually, I think is really important. I think that just helps build a relationship with us as the investor, but also with the teams themselves as well. So the sort of transparency piece and no surprises is something that I am, and we as an entity are very, very keen on. So I think that's important to us. I think picking up on Jonny's point, I guess the other key piece here is typically there's sort of leverage or bank debt going into a business, and that's ordinarily the first time that's happened. So being able to actively manage that, manage the stakeholders from the bank's perspective, but also clearly sort of view sort of 6-12 months in advance and identify if there are any potential challenges coming down the track, I think are, again, it's just a really important skill set to have, and having that open conversation about if there are issues coming and dealing with those together, I think is always it's a better strategy than doing it on the hop in a board meeting. So I think those are probably the key things, probably from my side, around that role.
Thanks very much, Charlie, for that. And Roshan, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I think that's a really complete answer. Kind of not hits all the kind of key technical points, I guess. Yeah, and the only thing I'd add is some of the softer points, and the P-backed investment journey is a journey, and it can be long and challenging and very very hard work and demanding. And so just ensuring that you're on that wavelength with the rest of the management team and the owners, and have the energy and passion and ambition and capacity to kind of do that work and go on that kind of journey, and kind of look to the the future opportunity and the future prospects of the business as part of that. Having that kind of energy, I think, is just really important. And being honest with yourself about the type of journey it's going to be.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks very much. And Roshan, if I can actually ask you, what elements of what we've been talking about I appreciate, but what does a successful FD CFO in a PE-backed company look like? I mean, what will they have achieved, put in place, etc., do you think? And Jonny, please add anything you'd like afterwards, if you'd like.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one, Mark. And I guess there's no kind of set list that I would think of. And there's it's certainly not a kind of checklist. And the main thing for me is, have you worked constructively with the management team, being able to and have been able to free up the time of the other members of that management team, such that they can wholeheartedly focus on strategy or operations or sales or driving the business forward, rather than as owner managers may tend to do, try and have a hand on every lever. And so giving the rest of the team their space to kind of focus on their functional areas, and making sure that you're in control of the detail on the numbers. But more specifically, I guess that there's a couple things that I think help represent that, and some experiences that FDs, CFOs may have been on, which kind of provide testament to that. And a corporate event of some sort, whether it's a fundraising, raising bank debt, acquiring a business, being acquired, something like that. The institutional rigor that kind of comes with that, and the diligence program that comes with that, having experienced that, I think is quite important. And then I guess internally doing something strategic internally, and I think a lot of the time that can be automating as much as your role and function as possible, so that you can spend time focusing on strategic analysis and strategic items, and therefore putting in place efficient systems, processes to enable you to be able to have accurate, timely financial and operational information at your fingertips, to share with the rest of the board and the business. Yeah. And then I guess the only other one is going through an exit. There's a whole kind of exit readiness process where we in private equity certainly like to think about the exit process quite early on, and kind of going through that journey means that you'll certainly have some marks on your back from that.
Thanks very much, Roshan. And Jonny, is there anything you'd like to add to that, or wish to add to that?
Yeah, maybe just a small point. Again, I think we've slightly referred to it, and that was a very comprehensive answer, obviously. But I think maybe on the very specific dynamics of it sounds like we're all very familiar with it, with looking at investments which are kind of first time institutional capital. So for me, having a CFO in place who, in terms of what they've done in the past, is that ability to perhaps challenge an owner founder, which we all know can sometimes be a bit of a challenge when it's someone else's baby. So being able to evidence as a CFO your ability really to stand up, whether it's in the boardroom or actually in a day-to-day role, to sometimes what we all know can be slightly crazy ideas or ideas that have come from from the heart and not always from the head. So I think for me that's quite an important one. And just finally, I think also the alignment point. So we're all acutely aware that kind of alignment of interest is critical to ensure all shareholders are driving in the same direction. So in terms of things to be sort of put in place, we're always keen to see CFOs who are very keen to obviously invest alongside ourselves as a fund, but also alongside the rest of the management team to ensure that alignment of interest of absolutely everyone around that table, focusing on the value creation going forwards.
Thanks, Jonny. And if I could actually put to you, and this is a question actually, it's one of the ones I do get asked repeatedly by finance directors and CFOs. How important is sector and possibly geography, domain that the business covers as well in terms of that expertise for an incoming PE-backed FD CFO?
Yeah, is that for me to answer? Sorry, Mark.
Yes, Jonny, please, if you would.
Yeah, I think, well, look, of all the roles, I suppose, at that sort of C-suite level, I think typically we'd feel the CFO one is kind of the least critical from a kind of domain expertise. And I think that's probably fair unless the underlying business model is particularly complex. So thinking again in our own cases, we look at a few rather complex niches within the pharma services industry where actually having a level of knowledge within that sector is probably critical for any role. But aside from that, I think the CFO role is one that is probably more malleable, and actually, specific domain expertise sometimes it's good not to have that, because you don't come with kind of preconceived impressions or conclusions about aspects of the market or the business or what the model should look like. Again, throwing just one other dynamic I can think of where, where things are particularly complex, or you might want a CFO with a sector background, is if the particular investment thesis has a dynamic to it, such as, perhaps a revenue model that one wants to transition to a SaaS model over time. Again, whilst it doesn't have to be specific to the current business, having that kind of expertise can be useful. But again, I would suggest from a CFO perspective, not a critical one.
Thanks very much. And hopefully some of the people I speak to are listening in, and you've now heard it from the expert. So, which is great. And Charlie, is there anything you would wish to add to that?
No, I think that's fair. I think it also does depend on the wider team as well. So the team experience within the broader team, and actually who you have around the table as well. Typically you have sort of sales ops and MD, and normally your domain expertise is sort of covered through that. So if you're looking for sort of winning sales, you obviously want a guy from the sector. Whereas I think the FD is less so. You want someone that's got the softer skills, and can sort of pull numbers together, sort of efficiently and diligently. So I think that's the sort of the key sort of core requisites. I do think there are, as Jonny says, there are sort of certain sectors. If you're in sort of deep manufacturing, then an idea of how absorption costing works and all that sort of finer details, I think is helpful in that. Or if you're in sort of niche sort of other niche areas, then I think that is helpful. But I don't think we don't look for someone really from the sector initially. We look at the wider skill set, and actually if the sector domain comes with that, then that's a bonus for us really. It's not necessarily the sort of prerequisite which we are looking for from someone. So I probably agree with Jonny on that.
Yeah. Oh, thanks again, and good to get your sort of confirmation almost of that. And Charlie, if I can ask you, are serial interim FDs and CFOs ever the solution for a new MBO?
I think it's a really good question. I think picking up on Roshan's point around, look, we like to sort of get someone alongside us if there's sort of a lack of depth in the finance team when we're doing the diligence phase. So, that can involve an interim, up front to sort of help us with that, in terms of that pre-diligence piece and pulling numbers together. So I think that can be absolutely helpful. And actually those people that are interims, obviously have sort of time available to do that. Whereas, longer term solution, people are typically in roles. So there is definitely a sort of a time and a place, for interim sort of CFOs and FDs in a business. I think it then comes back to how are you building value in the business, and recognizing that we're in sort of investments of sort of 3 to 5 years. I think you want someone around the table that is invested in the business, that has sort of equity in the business, that has a focus on building value in the business and has an interest in that. And I think, without someone that has equity in the business that has a longer term view, I think there is a different mindset, if you're sort of moving to your next assignment as an interim. So I think we would definitely look to have a sort of longer term sort of solution in there. I think there are situations where actually we've moved from, the interim candidate has moved into a sort of permanent role because actually it suited, all parties around the table. So I think it depends on the situation, really, I'd say. But ultimately, I think we'd look to a longer term sort of permanent solution, over the longer term.
Thanks, Charlie. And Roshan, would you add anything to that?
I think that aligns really well with our thinking. We like to try and get as many experts into our thinking on the way into a business. So that can be someone with financial expertise to support the team or kind of help us in our thinking, or it might be someone with domain expertise separately. So I think leaning on advisors and experts on the way in is a kind of good way to kind of kick off a situation.
Yeah. Thank you. And Roshan, if I can ask you, and this is an interesting one, I think. What do you as a PE investor look to test and challenge an incumbent FD and CFO on, when considering a PE investment into a business?
Yeah. So I guess ability to build relationships and the kind of softer side of things is really important, because the dynamics can be quite interesting when you've got an institutional investor or a bank lender going into a owner managed business for the first time, and it can be a little bit of a lonely place for the owner manager. We obviously try and work as closely and collaboratively with the management team as possible, but almost having that bridge of someone there who can say, well, actually, this is why this financial analysis is really important, and this is the business rationale, and the FD can sometimes play that role quite well, particularly when there's the kind of bank asking for lots of data, which doesn't sometimes seem apparent as to why. So the kind of relationship building piece is important, but then the core qualities of deep attention to detail and understanding of detail analysis, but without losing sight of the core strategy of the business. And so clearly being able to identify the key value drivers of a business or an investment strategy, and maintain focus on those, as well as the day-to-day nuts and bolts. And then the knowledge and experience and thinking of putting in place systems and processes that are going to make the FD CFO's life easier, but also make everyone in the business's life easier as well, is a really important one for us. Part of what we do is we accept that not everything is in place when we're investing, and that's part of our role to help shape the governance and processes and procedures in a business. And the FD CFO plays a key role in that. And then I guess just being cognizant of why the transaction is taking place in the first place. It is for us as investors and for the management team, it's about delivering a return over a period of time. And so kind of maintaining focus on that and have an understanding of, well, if this lever here moves, what impact does that have on the overall strategy and the end game and the target of realizing an investment over a period of time? There's a couple of things there. I'm sure that there's many more that we'd like to understand and test, but they're probably the key ones for me.
Yeah, no, thanks very much for that insight. And Jonny, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I think maybe just ownership of the plan is probably the one obvious one I'd probably add there, which, we're constantly wanting to test, management teams, I suppose, in that regard, sometimes led by the CFO, but also obviously massively on the CEO's shoulders, but just really ensuring that, the plan we're being asked to back is owned by the team. I think we've all been in those situations where it's evident that it's not, and that's always quite disappointing if there's sort of an advisor in play and people sort of point fingers and say, well, that's not our plan, it's theirs over there in the corner. So for me, that's really critical, and it's a core part of I suppose that sort of evaluation piece and really kicking the tires on both the CFO and the wider management team when it comes to sort of appraising a particular opportunity.
Oh, thanks very much. And just to everyone listening in, of course, thanks very much for attending. Hope you're enjoying this, and do post any questions in the chat box, and we will try to get round to them in the last sort of 15 minutes or so. I can see a few coming in already, some of which I know we're covering in the conversations, but I'm sure there'll be others, that we're not. So do post in the chat box, and thanks very much. Jonny, if I can ask you, so how different really is the FD CFO role from an operating and reporting perspective within a PE-backed leveraged environment?
Typically, from my experience, I would suggest under a sort of PE-backed environment, it's probably a bit more intensive. We love data. We're not shy about that. I think possibly, again, it clearly depends on the existing framework prior to the sort of private equity investment. But I would suggest it's often a bit more frequent. So, we're very often dealing with owner-founder businesses where I think it was Roshan mentioned earlier, sometimes don't even have CFOs in place, and that's a big component of what we're introducing, and that's fine, but it often means that the frequency or the quality of the information that is produced historically is, perhaps quarterly, perhaps the business is just managed for cash, perhaps it's only annual. We obviously like the frequency to be monthly and actually data to be sort of live. So I suppose the both intensity and the frequency are probably two kind of quite obvious differences from that initial transition. But with that, I'd hope comes the sort of more supportive aspect as well. Again, if you think about that transition from an owner-founded business or where there is a finance function, there is a CFO, perhaps not having quite the level of support that we hope, the likes of us, and I'm sure the two other chaps on the call today would be providing the companies we invest alongside. It's about that supportive relationship, which ensures that with that increased intensity, with that increased frequency, actually becomes a lot more of a supportive environment to kind of get there. It's not a case of asking CFOs to deliver things they've never done or without pointing them in the right direction. I, for example, am always available to my portfolio company CFOs, whether it's on the end of the phone, over email. We speak far more regularly than what is expected of just turning up to board meetings once a month and that's it. That's just fundamentally certainly not the way QPE operate with our portfolio companies and how we look to support and be available. And then I suppose we've touched on the fact that having a third-party institutional investor does mean we're extremely focused on growth and we're focused on underlying cash flow. And if there is a leverage, a debt financing partner involved, they're going to want to understand some key metrics in the underlying business, which again might be a bit of a change from a business that doesn't have a balance sheet with any debt on it, or doesn't really get run for necessarily growth, but just perhaps is a great cash cow for its existing owners. So I think that is often something from an environment of a CFO's perspective can be a big transition from one day to the next. But I'd summarize by also saying typically I find the very best CFOs we end up working alongside really relish that transition because they end up thriving in the environment that is a bit more kind of forward focused, growth focused. It's a bit more exciting, and again, hopefully, as with the alignment of interest with everyone being shareholders in kind of the company going forwards, actually they genuinely thrive in that environment.
Thanks very much, Jonny, for that. And Charlie, would you add anything to that?
No, I think that's broadly covering on. I would say, we probably come across as quite demanding sometimes. And that is about just getting to the nuts and bolts of the business and recognizing we're not in the business day to day, and we're focused on growing value. And it's about building KPIs and how do we measure and monitor where we are on that plan. And ultimately, sometimes it does depend where the incumbent FD or CFO is coming from in terms of their experiences before. So if you come from a FTSE business, then you're probably used to it. But I think if you come from a sort of other owner managed business, then it might be quite different in terms of what we're asking for. And it may sound like we're sort of very demanding, but ultimately it's about how do we measure and monitor the business, and that can be sort of quite demanding at times, but ultimately should be for the benefits of the business ultimately in terms of growing the business.
Thanks very much, Charlie. And I'm going to come on to now. And Charlie, I'm going to ask you actually initially, and this is a question, possibly one of the most common that I think we get and I get, is what advice would you give to an FD or CFO without PE experience who wishes to make a move to a PE-backed company?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think we would ordinarily like to have a CFO coming in with PE experience, but ultimately we regularly put in FDs that don't have that. So I think the things that are helpful, in terms of a new FD coming in, I think is keeping an open mind, and actually sort of challenging things. So typically these are businesses that have been run by a founder or an entrepreneur for many years, and it's the same way of doing things, but actually there may be a better way of doing things. So being able to sort of challenge things, get into the business, and introduce new disciplines, I think is one of the key things that we're looking for. I think it does go back to the point where lots of these businesses have very limited systems and controls in place, or they have a very sort of light team. So an ability to I guess implement that in a constructive way in terms of being able to build a team, build a proper sort of finance team, and build rigor within the finance team, I think is key. But I think also, the role in a sort of PE-backed business isn't just finance; it is broader than that. So it's coming at it with I guess a commercial hat on, but also an ability to sort of pick up other bits of the business as well. So it's not just finance; it does move into sort of the commercials and working with the sales director in terms of how do you model out these contracts. What does it mean to the business? As well as working with the ops team as well in terms of translating. What do the changes mean on the ops side? What does that actually mean to the business? So, I mean, an FD is sort of the scorekeeper really in terms of making sure that everything is humming within the business and you can measure and monitor it. So, it's having that sort of linked up role, I would say, within the broader business, within the broader executives that are there and sort of working together as a team. So, keeping open mind, and I do go back to no surprises and complete transparency. I think is something that is really key. Don't sit on problems. If there are problems, share them. If you've got a team around you and the investors supportive, and we're about finding solutions rather than burying bad news. So I would just reiterate no surprises. That is the way to succeed.
That's very helpful as well. And Roshan, is there anything you'd like to sort of add to that?
Yeah, so I guess specifically if it's advice, what can people do to get into a PE-backed situation? I guess the only advice would be like hunt out situations that look and feel similar. They don't have to have an institutional backer to be kind of similar from a kind of functional or situation perspective, but it's companies that are going through that transition of scaling up. Or transition of a management team in one way or another, and being involved in those and aiding in that kind of high growth situation, building the team out, being involved in a corporate event of some form, whether fundraising or something else, and involvement in a situation where you have been instrumental in putting in place new systems, governance structures, frameworks, processes, reporting procedures, KPIs. You've got the rest of the business really focused on what the key metrics, key drivers are, and you can kind of demonstrate that. I think that's pretty helpful, because that's largely what FDs are doing in PE-backed situations. And then from a purely selfish perspective, we in the industry spend, or the private equity execs in the industry spend most of our time either with our management teams or with advisors who are introducing deals to us. So, almost to kind of get on the radar and to get us thinking of you, there's no better way than to try and introduce deal flow to us. Yeah, I know it's difficult because they're not really in that market. But if there's companies that you're working at, come across that you think are interesting, high growth, you might be looking for additional funding or MBO opportunity, then please do shout out, and it's a good way for us to get talking at least.
Great, thanks very much, Roshan. And if I can put to you, I think elements of this have certainly been touched on, but a specific question: how can an FD CFO impact profitability, EBITDA, and exit value in a private equity-backed company?
Yeah, and it's a tricky thing to measure, but because there's no kind of revenue statistic associated with the usual functions of an FD or CFO, but there's absolutely a huge amount of value that those individuals can add. And I think again, I've mentioned it a few times, but it's about being focused on value drivers, how the business really makes money. If you understand that to its core principles, and you make sure everyone in the business, or at least in the management roles, really understands that, then I think you're going to get people's minds in the right way, and driving to achieve or make the kind of decisions that are going to achieve success in that respect. And then more tangibly, I guess it's almost being the second hand to the sales team or the head of sales, and making sure that you're to some extent managing and monitoring that team as well. So being all over the sales data, all over the reporting, and challenging the sales team when you think actually the process isn't or the data that your sales data that you're looking at doesn't reflect a quality process, or is reflecting some problem somewhere, surfacing that with the right people and trying to improve the problems by analyzing the output, analyzing the data. And now the process is the thing that's going to improve the situation, and the people are, but actually the thing that spits out is hard data. And if you kind of follow that and look at the root cause, then a lot of the time you can pick up problems, errors, improvements that others might not. So I'll kind of focus on those things. I'm sure there's lots of other things too.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Roshan. And Jonny, would you add anything to that?
I think that was, again, extremely comprehensive. I think, my summary would be very aligned with that, which is, fundamentally having a CFO who truly understands what makes the business tick, and supporting us as the investor and the partner to kind of help facilitate where the growth levers are to kind of accelerate the growth of the underlying business. Because often, one of the positive transitions into a private equity environment is that some of the historic constraints might be taken away. So if it's about hiring more people faster, or using price as a kind of lever for growth, or indeed kind of transitioning revenue models faster, I think all of those things are achievable under a private equity backed environment. And so for us, it's about working alongside teams, and specifically CFOs, who really understand those underlying levers, and being able to come forward and say, look, if we do this today, not in year 2 or year 3, we have the opportunity to kind of accelerate the growth of this underlying business. And I think as partners, those are exactly the kind of opportunities we want to be supporting and appraising.
Thanks very much, Jonny. And a couple of more questions that I'll be putting, and then we'll open this up and I'll ask some questions that I'm getting in the chat box. I'm getting some interesting, or we're getting some interesting questions here, some statements as well, and certainly a few people saying how much they're enjoying this. And I'll just Brenda's comment is typical of one. Really enjoying hearing directly from the PE guys. This is so valuable. So there you are, guys.
Thank you, Brenda.
Yeah, for Brenda. Brenda is typical of a number of others. So on to the second last question that I'll put, really. And if I can ask this to Jonny, how significant is the size of a company an FD or CFO has previously worked at?
I would say that, the prior team size and infrastructure is probably more critical than simply the size of the company. But those things are kind of often inextricably linked, I suppose. But I think the focus for us is always the fact that it's clearly very different operating as the CFO of a listed company or business with a 50-person finance function than it is having to come in and help us support in as we've talked about a few times today already, developing a function that isn't there, because that involves really rolling your sleeves up, building out the finance function, the plan, the KPIs, the reporting, things that perhaps didn't formally exist in a prior ownership. Good example often being the owner-founder examples we've referred to a few times today, and thinking about actually how you're going to grow a team, in many instances maybe to only 4 or 5 people strong over the life of our involvement. So I think for us, that is probably the key point. It's where we focus a lot of our time when we're meeting CFOs from varying degrees of backgrounds and size of companies, and having the ability to articulate actually why, if you're going for a role that is, I suppose, the latter of what I've described, which is supporting us in developing a function that's not there or far less sophisticated, if you've obviously been operating in a very different environment kind of historically, it's critical to really articulate why actually rolling your sleeves up and being involved and having that sense of ownership is what you want to do, and is how you perform as an individual, because there are very different ends of the spectrum when it comes to that role of CFO. And I think what is evident from today and the 3 of us on this call is the end of the market and the size of investments that we're all making is certainly that that requirement to have people who have that willingness to sort of roll up their sleeves and dig in.
Thanks, Jonny, for that. And Charlie, would you add anything there?
No, I think I'd agree with that. I think the role, FTSE sort of listed business is a very different role to an SME business. So I absolutely agree that the rolling your sleeves up point is absolutely right. And sort of being able to sort of manage a small team, is the key there. I think ultimately the businesses that we're typically backing don't have number of sort of sites overseas. That may be part of the plan. So having lots of sort of experience of foreign exchange or consolidation isn't really sort of core of what we want. We're more about someone that's going to be active in the business, roll their sleeves up, and get involved in the nuts and bolts, really. So I'd agree with that. It's really about situational rather than anything else.
Thanks, Charlie. And I'll put the last question to you. Again, elements I think you've touched on, all of you, but how influential on business strategy and management can the FD or CFO be in a PE-backed company?
Yeah, I really wouldn't underestimate this actually. I think it sort of moves from just being producing the numbers to actually sort of supporting the team. And I think we're very much data people. So if we want to sort of introduce an investment into a certain area of the business, then we'll want to sort of measure and monitor that. So being able to sort of clearly articulate what the investment is and what we're anticipating to drive from that, and then being able to measure and monitor that to then prove out that strategy is absolutely fundamental. So that is absolutely key. And being able to measure and monitor and actually learn from that. It may not go the way you expect, or it may be better than that, but that then provides a basis to provide more funding or to invest in other areas, or to sort of take strategy in a different direction. So I really wouldn't underestimate that at all. I think sort of picking up on a point before as well. I think even we look at accounting policy sometimes. So in an old environment, sometimes the business isn't accounting properly. It might not be spreading its income properly, or actually it might just have the wrong accounting policy, which again that can have quite a big impact on presentation of numbers, exit value, but also cash flow as well. So what I would say is that there's lots of areas where value can be sort of gleaned from the sort of finance function. And very much it can be sort of focused and influential on strategy.
Thanks, Charlie. And Roshan, just to sort of close on the questions I'm putting, is there anything you'd add, should I say, to what Charlie said there?
I'll help you close out on the questions, Mark, and say no, there's probably not. I think Charlie's hit the nail on the head. There's a load of value that FDs can add.
I'd like to say we did not rehearse that, but thanks very much, Roshan, nevertheless. So I'm now going to move, for 10 minutes or 10 to 15 minutes before we close with what I think are some great questions from you who have been attending and listening to this webinar. And if I could put to the panel, whoever would like to comment on this, Carmo has asked, how would you suggest FDs manage the balance between no surprises to the investors versus loyalty to the rest of the management team? In brackets, if the rest of the management team would like to hold back from specific disclosures. Bit contentious maybe, but why not?
Yeah. Well, happy to crack on with that one. I think that's a really interesting dynamic, and it comes back to the working relationship you have with the teams. I mean, I think there are ultimately what we'd like to be presented with is the challenges and a solution. So ultimately there's a dialogue that needs to happen within the team in terms of, well, where are we? What does this mean? How do we mitigate this? And there's probably a number of ways of doing that. So it's about having that constructive conversation as a team and presenting it to us, as the investors about, these are the issues and these are the potential solutions. And I think it comes back to the point of, if it's landed in a board meeting, on page 3, that's not particularly helpful, because ultimately it doesn't give anyone time and space to think about things properly and have a proper conversation. So if there's an opportunity to have a call before the board meeting and assess these things, we would much rather have that, collectively as a team and work out what the solutions are. But I totally accept there is there's a dynamic within a team that actually you are trying to work together to sort of find solutions out of things. So it's not phoning us immediately when a customer sort of terminates. It's about sort of having a measured response to that, but also not just dropping it on, just before a board meeting or at a board meeting. I think that's probably it's a balance. I'd say very much a balance.
Thanks, Charlie.
Sorry, Mark, to jump in.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah. I think it also quite helpfully sort of tease up the response as to why I would suggest, certainly those of us that believe in the sort of private equity chairmanship model also comes into play quite nicely as well. Because whilst we never want management teams, withholding information for us that's critical to the business, or I think that the phrase disclosure was used, which can be a bit alarming. But I think having that kind of third party, independent, if you like, to sit in the middle of the relationship between the team and the private equity house in particular, I think that what was articulated there, that situation or that example would be a great reference point where I'd expect that CFO to actually reach out to the chair themselves and say, look, this is the challenge. This is something that I've uncovered, or I feel is appropriate to let the main investor know. The board meeting's in a couple of weeks, whatever. The team don't want to do that yet. And to Charlie's point, doing it in an informed manner with some solutions presented as well is fundamentally what we task our chairs with doing as well alongside the management team. So it's hopefully gives a bit more framework as to how that kind of relationship can work. And it doesn't always necessarily have to be, straight on the phone. This is the issue. Haven't thought of a solution yet. And I'm doing this in isolation because no one else kind of agrees with me.
Yeah. And I guess I'll just add that it probably happens a lot less than you might anticipate. And, certainly I think for all three of us on the call, our strategy is backing existing management teams, and it's being fully aligned with them and being aligned around a plan. But you can only do that based on the information you have on day one of the investment. And so once we've made the investment, we all know that things change. The world around us changes, and we don't expect things to follow an Excel spreadsheet plan. And when things do change, where there is a supportive partner to use our resources, our time, our thinking, our people, try and help the business through those decisions as easily, swiftly, constructively as possible. And so, we normally get the management team, obviously having thought about solutions, as well as the issues, raising that with us pretty quickly and not saying, oh, tail between the legs, sorry guys, this is what happened. It's, well, this is what's happened, guys, but this is what we think we want to do about it. How can you, YFM or private equity partner, how can you help us with that? And then it's on us as well to try and think of those solutions and try and support the business through them.
Thanks very much. And by the way, just to remind, although we've not got long left, do put your questions in the chat box, and and not email them, as I think Zoom has possibly asked you to. Just moving on to another question, and thanks again for that. And Brenda has actually asked, when M&A activity takes place, I've found companies bring in external advisors and the internal team only support. Is this support experience still valued by you?
I'll quickly tag on there because it'll be quick. So in my experience, I appreciate there's lots of different situations, but that's not the typical route that I see. So it is the management team who have a strategy and want to go through a fundraising event or an acquisition or sale or something of that nature, and they are saying we need additional resources to support us through that process. We need an advisor to advise us, but also to manage the procedural aspects of it, and to get the right people to the table and create competitive tension. So it's very much the advisor working for the business, not the other way around. And that's the way we want to see. We're not backing an advisor when we make an investment. We're backing a management team. So we need it to come from need the story and the narrative to come from that team.
Thanks very much. Excuse me. Does anyone want to add to that, or moving on? Mike has asked, do the panelists only consider full-time or interim full-time finance director appointments for investee companies, or would they also consider part-time?
It's obviously unique to each of us, I'm sure, but I mean, from our perspective, it's definitely, I think we touched on the interim versus perm, but I think, from a part-time versus full-time, it's arguably more than a full-time role, certainly in the early days, for all the reasons I think we've been discussing today. So, certainly from a QPE perspective, where we are bringing CFOs to the fore in terms of complementing a management team that we're backing, or indeed there is an existing one, we fully expect that to be a full-time role, because there's so much to do with regards to all the things that I think we've been touching on today, and getting on and focusing on that value creation plan.
Yeah, I think that's right. So same from our situation, I think, as well. Even though they're sort of small businesses, I think there's a lot going on. Yeah, and ultimately, there's the day job, but there's all the other roles as well that need to be fulfilled. And there are always things that happen in a business. So new contracts or refinancings or exit processes. They're all highly sort of time draining. So it'd be rare for us to have a sort of part-time sort of candidate in the businesses. That's not to say it wouldn't work for some, but I think we would certainly look at it as the CFO being a core member of the management team and being there sort of full time, really.
Thanks for that. And we may get one or two more in. Mark has asked, with multiples quite frothy currently in many sectors, what are the key value creation attributes that you expect a quality business to have to maximize multiple at exit? And how has that changed with how COVID will affect the LTM results?
Well, Jonny knows all about frothy multiples, so I'll let him take that one. Sorry.
That's. I think there was a compliment in there.
Maybe.
I think. Yeah, I mean, great. Wow, great! Quite a lot of questions in there in one. To be totally honest, can you just repeat the beginning of it, Mark? Sorry.
Yeah, sure. It is a bit of a double-headed question.
Yeah.
With multiples quite frothy currently in many sectors.
Yeah.
What are the key value creation attributes that you can expect a business to maximize?
Got it. Sure. So I think, look, from a QPE perspective, we actually have what we call it our value creation playbook, which is is 5 levers within which we actually appraise each and every opportunity we work with and then look to evaluate going forwards and implement. I think that runs right through from kind of strategic initiatives, operational initiatives. We've talked a bit about M&A today. How can one accelerate the growth of an underlying business? So for us, to be perfectly frank, it obviously depends entirely on the situation, but it's ultimately about trying to apply the best disciplines, both in kind of the pre-deal due diligence. But then, as I think Roshan said before, once you're invested alongside the management team in a particular opportunity, it's about reacting live to some of those value creation initiatives that one can build along the way. Around the sort of frothiness and the COVID point, I think those are quite interesting ones, because actually, again, one of the reasons we set QPE up as we did to focus very specifically on this end of the market is that I think we feel there is a lot of kind of low-hanging fruit in terms of value creation that can be added to businesses. I would say the introduction of a CFO and better financial reporting on the and KPI tracking, so that on the way out of the investment in 4, 5, 6 years time, that the quality and richness of the data vis-a-vis maybe the quality and richness and amount of data on the way in is often very, very different, and that can be a huge value contributor when it comes to running an exit process or having a lot of data to support some of the key messages on the way out. So I think that is probably where I would certainly be most sort of excited and be focusing at this end of the market with the value creation part to that question.
Oh, thanks, Jonny.
I was going to chuck in the compliment now, Jonny, and just say that from my understanding, you're quite involved in acquisition strategies for your portfolio companies, and certainly we've seen that for some of your kind of platforms, portfolio companies, and that's part of what private equity can offer. We kind of know our way around a deal and a deal process. And we look at lots of different business plans and try and understand the value drivers, and throughout the course, so supporting our portfolio companies or making those acquisitions can be quite a good value add that we can deliver.
Great.
Yeah, agreed. Thanks.
I'm gonna try and squeeze in one last question before I do a little bit of a close. Guys, if I could ask just literally a minute or so on this one, but it's a great question and I'd like to get it in. Shelley asks, does the PE industry see any particular value in diversity, ethnic, gender, etc., to have differing views and world experience at the table, as many in banking, securities, IT industry are leading the way in? So literally a few seconds on this, if you don't mind.
100%,
absolutely.
Yes.
Sorry, we're all jumping in. I'll be quick. Absolutely, and to kind of testament to that, we've signed up to the UNPRI, UN Principles of Responsible Investing, and that's all about screening new investments against the ESG criteria, but more importantly, helping portfolio companies, helping investee companies along that ESG journey, helping them improve their diversity, their governance, their social responsibility, all of those factors, which we think is really important to create value creation, but also from a societal perspective.
Thanks very much. Charlie, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I'd say it's a similar situation for us, and we have a pretty clear sort of ESG criteria, which we sort of look at sort of on the way in, but also as well as sort of part of that journey. And I think, it's becoming increasingly important, sort of diversity as well as the sort of social impact of businesses. I think there's lots of reports actually that indicate that a diverse board, as well as a business that's focused on sort of the social elements of their business, is actually creates a lot more value over the sort of longer term. And I think that is absolutely core to what we're doing.
Thanks very much, Charlie. And I'm going to bring this to a close because the Zoom will close us down. So I'm not being rude. But as we bring it to, I'd like to really thank Jonny, Roshan, and Charlie. It's been great. I've enjoyed it. I think everyone else has, and I hope the panel have as well. And I'd like to see you again sometime. I'd also like to thank all of you for attending. I hope you all got something out of it. Feel free to contact the panelists about your business, fundraising, etc. Do let us know feedback. I'll email you all a post that you can look at on LinkedIn where you can comment. I'll email you the link to the post. Hopefully you'll interact with us on something one way or another with FD Recruit in due course. We've got ongoing webinars, etc. And see you in another one maybe. Have a great day. Thanks very much. And again, thanks to everyone, and speak to you all soon. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
Bye.